Hello everyone and welcome to the October 2019 update of Power BI Desktop. We have a ton of features for you guys this month, so let's go ahead and get started. So first on our list in our reporting section, we have automatic page refresh for direct query. This new preview feature is perfect for fast updating data sources that require a near real-time experience. Now I'm going to hand it off to Miguel, who's going to show you this feature in action.
So the first feature that we're going to cover is automatic page refresh, or APR for short. What is it? It's a feature in Power BI that allows your active report page to query for new data at a predefined interval that the author of the report defines, and it works for direct query sources. So you can see here, for example, that we have a report that shows tweets for Power BI and Microsoft keywords, and it's connected to a direct query source, which in this case is a SQLDB in Azure. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go to the menu here, the page format menu, expand page refresh, and I'm going to turn it on. And you can see that I already predefined it to 1 second. You can see that the report is basically going to the source and getting any new data every second. You can set up this interval to any value you want, and then if you want to turn it off, I just go here and turn it off. A couple of things that are important to mention when it comes to automatic page refresh. So we already said that it's only supported for now for direct query data sources. Number two is that desktop works differently from the service. So whatever time you have here is independent from what you set up in reports in the Power BI service. The reason being that when you are in the service, there are two things that influence this. One is the time that is set up here. The second one is where does the report live. If it lives in a regular workspace, in a shared workspace, basically not a premium capacity, the minimum time for the interval is going to be 30 minutes. If you have it on a premium workspace, it's going to depend on the settings for your premium admin. Number one, if they turn on or off the feature itself, and also what's the minimum time. So in this particular case, let's say I publish this to a premium workspace that only has 5 minutes as a minimum. We are going to override that 1 second to the 5 minutes that the admin set up.
Moving on to our analytics section, we have some major updates to Q&A, which include a brand new built-in visual, an improved user experience, and a new Q&A tooling experience. We have Mo here today who's going to give you an in-depth demo of these new Q&A updates.
This month, we have released major new updates to Power BI Q&A. Q&A is our natural language experience that allows business users to ask natural language questions to query and interrogate their data. Today, we're going to be showing you the brand new Q&A visual, which is a visualization designed to allow report authors to drag a Q&A visual onto the canvas and create very compelling experiences using natural language. In this report, I am looking at Hawaii tourism analysis. So I wish to see how people are spending their time across the different islands in Hawaii. First of all, I'm going to head over to the visualization pane and create the new Q&A visual. And so you can see this new icon that we've just released this month. When you click it, it will now create a native visual inside the canvas. The great thing about the new Q&A visual is it's completely customizable. So you can choose its dimensions, its placement on the canvas, and it also respects bookmarks and theming colors. So if I wish to easily change the theme, Power BI will now, or the Q&A visual will now respect any theme that you select. And it will obey the theme and it will apply the theme to both the suggested boxes as well as the underlying visualization. When you first create the Q&A visual, you'll notice that we provide you a list of suggested questions. This really helps business users to quickly identify key questions that they may wish to ask and allows them to understand some of the key terminology that they can do. So in this case, I'm going to click on the top trip purposes by arrivals per month and see what Q&A shows me. In this specific month's release for Q&A, we've made a massive improvement in the visualizations that are returned by Q&A. So as you can see, in this case, Q&A decided that a bar chart was the best chart to show this visualization and actually plots trip purpose on the y-axis and places arrivals per month on the x-axis. Let's type in another question and see what other experience improvements we made for Q&A. So I'm going to type in total visits by island. And first of all, one of the cool things that you see with the new Q&A experience is we've drastically improved the drop-down experience and made it more search-like. So as business users are typing in their question, we will automatically provide them feedback to help them complete their sentence and provide them alternative suggestions on other questions that they could ask. The other thing you'll note in this specific example is we use blue underlines to help users indicate what has Q&A recognized and what has Q&A not recognized. So if I misspell island, Q&A will now use red underlines to help you understand that it has not understood this word and actually provides you potential suggestions on what it could be. We've also integrated with Office and Bing. And so if I type in a question, show me average temperature by landmass, what's interesting is Power BI actually hasn't understood the word landmass. However, with our integration with Office and Bing, we've assumed that landmass could also mean the word island, which is matched inside your data, and actually return that as a visualization result. So this is really useful when scenarios when you're using common keywords or common words that could also mean other things. And this helps business users type in more naturally and allows Q&A to really do the magic behind the scenes and quickly find the terminology that you actually meant inside Power BI. Let's try another question. So in this example, I'm going to ask Q&A to show me the total visits by cooler islands. And as you can see, the word cooler has not been recognized. If I click on the word cooler, you can see that Q&A has no suggestions for me. However, I can now define the word cooler. By clicking this blue link, it will now open up the Q&A tooling dialog, which allows me to go and fix questions in Q&A using natural language. So in this case, I want to fix the question that I just showed earlier, and I'm going to hit submit. So as you can see, Q&A has done its best to try to understand the word cooler and understand how you might go ahead and fix it. So in this case, Q&A has come up with a simple statement that says cool islands are islands that have, and it now wants me to describe a condition that fulfills this requirement. So I'm going to type in islands that are cool are islands that have average temperature of less than 85. And this will now update the visualization so I can now see the result. And I can see that I've got the right islands, which are the cool islands inside Hawaii. And I can now save this definition and go to manage terms inside the Q&A tooling experience. And I can see all the list of suggested questions that I've saved and all the fixes that I made. The final feature that I want to show you for the Q&A tooling experience is called review questions, which allows me to see all the questions that people have asked against my data model, against my report inside the Power BI service. So that's via dashboards, via the reports, and allows me to see a coherent view of what users are typing and which results aren't working and how I could go ahead and fix them. I can also see the date that these questions were asked, and I can also see if business users want this to be fixed. So when they get red on their question, they can actually flag questions so that you know that these are high priority things that you should go ahead and fix using the Q&A tooling dialog. That's about it for the new Q&A tooling experience. We really hope you enjoy these new features, and we really value your feedback.
Another Q&A related update this month is that Q&A now supports SQL Server Analysis Services and Azure Analysis Services, allowing you to connect to your data without having to first import the data. Note that this feature is in preview, so you'll need to make sure you enable Q&A Live Connect in the Options dialog of Power BI Desktop. So that's all the Q&A updates that we have this month. We'd love for you to try it out and let us know what you think.
We have a number of visualization updates for you this month, so let's jump right in. First, the Power Apps visual is now included by default. Last month, we announced that it was generally available and certified, but you needed to add it from the marketplace as a custom visual. Now, you'll find it automatically included with the other built-in visuals within the visualization pane. This visual is an important integration with the rest of the Power Platform and enables key scenarios like write back and taking immediate data-driven actions across your insights. We have 3 new visuals for you as a part of the XViz suite. This suite is a set of custom visuals that aims to meet your end-to-end BI needs. You can use all the visuals in the suite for free, with their branding and some data row restrictions, or you can pay one price to unlock all of them. The first one we have available for you is the Hierarchical Variance table. This table lets you compare to measures within a hierarchical table layout, and see the variance, the percent variance, and how that contributes to the whole. We can also include a date field to see a spark line within the table. Let's go ahead and make one as an example. So I got the hierarchical variance table from the marketplace. In here, I'll set its category as category. And for the sake of hierarchy, I'll include a subcategory. For value, I'll add sales amount because that's what I would like to visualize. And in time period, I'll include the order date. Now we can see that we've populated the table with these different fields, and we have informative insights already. If we'd like to format this, we can go into number formatting and change the number formatting. We can also include semantic formatting, which changes the colors of these cells based on whether or not they're positive or negative. We can also change their actual format as well. There are other formatting options we can do by right-clicking the row headers. We can do things like rearrange the row headers, sort them, rename them, hide empty rows, or even add a search bar in this case of Power BI Service. The next visual we have for you this month is the linear gauge, which allows you to compare a value to a target goal. Let's take a look at an example. Here we're comparing state bottle retail against state bottle cost. If we'd like to change the colors of the bands or the thresholds of those colors, we can do that in the conditional formatting card in the formatting menu. For example, if I would like to change this to black, I will change the lower band color to black. Similarly, I can change the lower band threshold and update that by changing which changes the size of the band in comparison to the other band. I can also change the marker formatting and the marker shape, size, and offset from the bottom. I can do so in the Gauge Options menu. Other formatting options include setting minimum and maximum values, axis formatting, including text size, colors, label density, and data label formatting. The final visual we have for you this month is the tag cloud. This word cloud visual allows you to get instant insights of the more prevalent terms in your data, such as product descriptions, tweets, and feedback comments. Let's take a look at an example. Here we can see an example of a tag cloud. Some key features and options of this tag cloud include being able to split phrases into individual words, remove special characters, exclude words, and format the word size, color, angles, and a number of orientations. So as far as word cloud visuals go, it gives you a lot of opportunities for customization and allows you to really manipulate the word cloud in such a way that it presents the insights in a very understandable manner. You can also control the color and the size of the words based on different metrics. And of course, like the other XViz apps, you can find this on the Marketplace store. We also have a number of updates for you on the data connectivity end. First, Sagra Amigo connector is now generally available. Amigo supports sales organizations and field teams management, automating all daily activities of field professionals. Inventory data, orders, answers from surveys, or all sorts of other digital forms are available for managers through the BigSense Power BI app, as well as through Amigo's BI connector for Power BI Desktop. Next, we have an update for you on Azure Cost Management. This connector enhances exploration and analysis of your Azure cost data. The connector now supports OAuth 2.0 for authentication. It supports both Microsoft Customer Agreement and Enterprise Agreements, includes some enhancements to RI recommendations and RI usage data, and the addition of amortized cost, and includes some performance improvements as well. Lastly, we have a new Workplace Analytics connector. Microsoft Workplace Analytics uses data from everyday work in Office 365 to identify collaboration patterns that impact productivity, workforce effectiveness, and employee engagement. So use Microsoft Workplace Analytics to help your customers speed transformation using new insights about the way their people and teams work. Next, this month's template app is aimed at helping project, portfolio, and resource managers who work in Project Web App to visualize their work. The report model was built using the Project Web App data connector, and it can be connected to your own Project Web App data using your own credentials. This template app is comprised of 13 visually rich report pages to support your Project Web App management needs. Here's an example of what one of those report pages looks like. This set of reports in total enables users to do a deep dive analysis on project management, resource management, and portfolio management views. Overall, it's a great out-of-the-box solution for managers that use Project Web App to take their data to the next level. You can install the app right in the Power BI service and set its parameters to your Project Web App site URL and the language your site is in. If you want to learn more, feel free to check out its documentation. On the data preparation side of things, we've got a couple updates for you, including a powerful new feature, Query Diagnostics. This is a feature that will allow you to determine what the mashup engine is doing during authoring time. While we do plan on expanding on this feature in the future, including allowing you to use it during full refreshes, at this time, it already allows you to understand what sorts of queries you're emitting, what slowdowns you might run into during authoring refresh, and what kind of background events are going on. Let's see how to enable it. In Power BI, we head into File menu, go to Options and Settings, open up Options, and in the Preview Features section, we turn on Query Diagnostics. And that's it. Query Diagnostics is activated. So, to help us understand how to start and use Query Diagnostics, another PM, Colin, has taken the time out to make a demo for us and to talk a bit about the feature. So, here he is presenting it now.
Thanks, Rian. So today I'm going to show the demo of the new public preview feature, Query Diagnostics. Query Diagnostics is a new feature in Power Query in Power BI that will give you more insight into how your queries are operating than we've ever shown before. So to get started, I'm going to go to the Power Query editor and I'm going to create a new query. But unlike usual, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go to this new Tools tab that you get from turning on the feature, and I'm going to press Start Diagnostics. Now, what Start Diagnostics does is it starts listening to the traces that the engine is emitting. So it's listening for these traces, and now I'm going to go into Recent Sources, and I'm going to click on my database. Now, the database that I've selected has a table in it, which is based off of the Northwind sample database that we distribute with SQL Server. So I'm going to select Customers, and I'm going to press OK. Now, I'm going to do import, but this also works in authoring mode in Direct Query. It won't work for many connectors in Direct Query when you're actually loading via Power BI, because it's not being evaluated by Power Query. It's being evaluated by Power BI in a slightly different fashion. So just to repeat myself, Direct Query authoring will be useful for Query Diagnostics, but they won't be useful for when you're using it in the full dashboard. So you can see that I've loaded in my initial data, but maybe I want to put a couple of filters on this. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I only really want to look at sales representatives, because I want to see what sales representatives there are. Then, and this is kind of arbitrary for the sake of this demo, but let's say I just want to have one single row of data. I just want to look at the company Alfred's Fuderkist and contact Maria Anders. So I'm going to right-click on that, and I'm going to make sure that we look at this. So this is kind of an arbitrary query to show off what you're doing, but we've put a couple operations, and we now have data that's been transformed from the source. So I can go back to my Tools pane, and I can press Stop Diagnostics. And what you'll see is this has now populated two new queries, a detailed and an aggregated version. Now, the detailed and the aggregated have the same data, but the aggregated version is trying to make some inferences about what type of things are important to you as a user. In public preview, we recommend today that if you really want to have the best insight, that you stick to the detailed view and give us feedback on how well the aggregated view represents that information so that we can make improvements on what we showed you, how we group it, etc. So I'm going to go to this detailed view, and I'm going to kind of go through the columns with you. We have an ID, and the documentation goes into depth about how this is built, but it gives a unique identifier for a given evaluation in a single recording session. We can see in this column query. Now, there's a couple different things you'll see. You'll see that there's the actual query we have, which was query 1 before it was named. And then you also have this long string. And you'll see if you look, it says navigator base. And what that says is it's basically assigning pulling up the navigator to a query name, and it's showing you what's happening as you work through that navigator to access those tables. The step, and we can go back to the customers table, but this is all part of the source step. The category of evaluation, is it accessing the data source? Is it the evaluator? Is it pulling it into the preview? Is it actually reaching back to the back end of the SQL? All those different things. Data source kind. So if you're dealing with multiple different data sources, such as SQL versus MySQL, this will help you differentiate in the logs what it is. The actual name of the operation. So this is a little bit more granular than the category. For instance, you can see that in this row, evaluator is the category and the operation is getResult. But in this row, evaluator is the category and getResultCompile is the detailed operation. The start time is when that particular item on the traces started being traced, and the end time is when it finished. The exclusive duration is a little bit complicated, and you can read about it more in the documentation, like I said. But if you have two operations that overlap somewhat, the exclusive duration is the amount that was contributed by one but not by the other. So if one operation starts and then another operation starts and there's a significant period of overlap, one of those operations will get the overlap period and the other operation will only get the part that isn't overlapping. These should always total up to 100%. This is how we make sure that it's clear the total amount of time taken rather than adding up all the pieces that overlap. The percent exclusive duration talks about the contribution to the percent of the total time, and this should total up to 100%, as I said, for a given evaluation, not for an entire trace. The raw amount of time, the actual database or API endpoint, sometimes a more complicated URL would fall into the resource column, the query being emitted, and some of these are going to differ connector to connector. Part of this is because not all connectors are built the same. Some of this is because we're going to be going through and adding more information in our existing connectors to make it properly propagate into these query diagnostics, and sometimes just because of how maybe custom connectors or accessing web endpoints works, it's not going to have quite as much information as the more detailed like SQL connector that we ship with Power BI. The row count will be populated for a number of our top databases, and if we filter this, we could find some rows where it reported a row count number, and that's really useful for seeing how many rows are actually being brought back at different steps. The content length is mostly relevant for web calls, whether or not it's a user query. So there's a lot of queries that get emitted by Power Query to make you have a more easy user experience. For example, when you click to filter something, it's going to pull a list of values, if you want, above and beyond what's just in the preview pane to show you all of those values that are also on the database. So let's say you're pulling only your 1,000 rows for preview, but there's 1 million rows in SQL and there's a bunch of values that didn't make it to preview. It's going to run an evaluation to find out what the unique values you can filter to are, and that will show up here. And finally, you can see the path. The path is a somewhat complicated idea, and again, it's in more details in the documentation, but you can see that this is path 0 and this is path 0, 1. And what that means is that this is the root of this evaluation, and that this is the child of that 0. So you can kind of build a tree understanding which operations call other operations, and that's why we had to do the work with the exclusive duration. And finally, we have a group ID, which allows us to kind of aggregate up into the summary area. So this is mostly if you want to have a key that links through the summary area. Now, in the future, there will be a number of additional columns coming for the detailed diagnostics that include information about like what process it was attached to in Windows and other things like that. Now, I'm going to enable this I'm going to rename and enable this detailed diagnostics. I'm going to call it customers filter authoring detailed, just so I can keep track of it in Power BI. And I'm going to enable it. Now, there's a decent amount to this. And what I want to do is I want to load this really quick to the model so I can show you what it looks like. So there's a lot of different ways that you can look at these traces. I have my own preferred way to look at the data, which I'll show you how I set up, but you can do whatever works best for you. So I'm going to get started by pulling up a stacked column chart. And in this stacked column chart, I'm going to put in my step, my ID, and my query. Now, it's only going to show the step as the primary thing, but I like to move it around when I'm playing with and examining exactly how the data is handled, like the different categories. I'm going to put the exclusive duration in, and I'm looking at absolute time here. And I'm going to put it in a start time so that I can make sure that I can sort to understand that it has the proper order. So let's go here. Let's sort by exclusive start time, sort ascending. And then let's go in and do it by ID. So you can see that there has been a number of queries emitted here. So this is for a combination of reasons. Let's put in a table so that we can understand a little bit better exactly what goes into each of these. So I'm going to put a table, and I'm going to put in the fields of ID, start time, query, step, the data source query, the exclusive duration percentage, and the row count. So if I click one of these evaluations, it will tell me, okay, so the first thing it did is there was a source step. Then it pulled up the navigator, and there was a series of different operations in the navigator. Here, we finally are getting information about the actual database, and it's getting information, it wants to know about this database system, all that stuff. These are metadata queries that it will emit pretty much for every. So we can see that in this query, there is, we start seeing actual data source queries. And you're going to see in query diagnostics a lot of the time, there are a number of metadata queries that you never chose to emit. And that's because they're part of the system that makes the whole thing work. Power Query works a lot of the time with more integrated connectors like SQL off of knowing exactly what is happening on the database. So it's asking, what's the version of the database? What is information about our table schema? All of these things have to do with it finding out things about the database before you ever emit your actual query. So if you see those, don't worry, it's doing its job. So we can click through and we can see that, we're still in the navigator, right? We aren't attached to our query name yet. But it grabbed that preview of the customers pane. That's when I clicked on the customers table in the Northwind database, it brought back that data, and that's represented here. So finally, we started loading that information to our query, and it built the source and the navigation properly in the preview, and then it finally started, retrieving data. So we can filter this, and we can say, I really only want to see the data source. So we can actually go through and we can see what the things hitting the data source were. It's selecting the top 1,000. Here it selects, sales representative, all these things. So that's actually, this is you can see if you look at the stacked column chart at the top, it's highlighted just the data source across this entire layer. Now, occasionally you're going to see multiple similar queries emitted that return similar things. And this is one of two things. In some cases, this is because of parallelization. And in other cases, it's because we're emitting a query and then canceling it for some process reason. In general, if you find that there's lots of queries that are taking up too much time, for instance, you can see that all of these were pretty fast. These were happening on the order of milliseconds. And there's multiple queries being emitted that seem identical that are taking up a lot of time. It's worth, engaging with us about that, reporting that via your normal support channels, and that will allow us to make our product better and see if we can't get rid of some of those extraneous queries that we're emitting. So we have a look of what this authoring experience looks like, and kind of like you'd expect by something that's doing a lot of work in the back end and trying to provide a very fluid, changing experience, there's a number of queries that get omitted. But what about when we're not authoring, we're just refreshing? So there's two things I'm going to walk you through there. Now, if I go back to the editor, I'm going to go back to Tools, and I'm going to start Diagnostics again, and then I'm just going to refresh our query. That's it. It refreshes, it's nearly instant, and we stop. So just like before, same columns, I'm going to rename this. I'm going to call this Customers Filter Refresh Preview Detailed. I'm going to enable load, apply, and so now that's loaded into the model. So it's not really pretty, but I'm going to have to basically rebuild this report real quickly. So I've duplicated the page, and I'm going to go down to my new table, and I'm just going to swap these fields out. So you can already see, and we're gonna make sure that this is arranged by earliest start time again, and we haven't rebuilt the table yet. You can already see that it looks very different from the authoring experience. So again, to change these fields over from the old table to the new table, and you can see that unlike the authoring experience where there's a lot of extraneous queries, what we have here is a kind of much more easy to read depiction of what's going on. So let me put step at the top so that you can see how these correspond to the actual steps. We have our final filtered evaluation, and then it works back through the list. So this is something that isn't necessarily obvious to all Power BI users, but it's how Power Query works. Power Query, when you refresh it in the editor, which means that when you go here and you press this refresh button or press refresh all, instead of just refreshing the final step in your query, this filtered rows 1, it will do that, but then it will also walk back through these steps so that you have fresh data. And the reason this is because it doesn't apply those steps sequentially by default. Because the final step might do something that makes previous steps much faster to display the data, it will do that first because that's what you care about. Say, you want to do all sorts of aggregations, but on your final step, you perform some operation that would massively restrict the amount of data those aggregations had to be applied to. Well, it would work to make sure that you had a SQL query emitted that represented that final step, and that would be quick. But in the steps before where you applied that filter, it might take a little bit longer. So by default, when you press refresh preview, it's going to walk back through it, which is why we have those 5 steps instead of just 1 for the final step. It's also why you can see that the last step you applied is the one that happened first chronologically, and then it stepped back through the step list to try to make sure that if you clicked on those steps earlier in the process, you'd have fresh data. So we can just select filtered rows 1, and this will show us, here's our different data source queries, etc. So normally what you'll see is that you're having a lot of metadata queries. Down here we start getting into the actual emitted final query. So it's selecting the top 1,000, that's for preview. It selects all of the rows that are part of the query. It selects it from the table, and then it applies those transforms that we did. It takes the transform that we made in Power Query, and it emits it to the backend SQL server. So sales representative and customer ID is ALFKI. So again, somewhat simpler than authoring, but that's not the use case that I think that you're going to most likely use to check at the end. What a lot of our users are really asking for is the ability to understand where time is spent at the end when they're finally doing their refreshes. What's taking time to refresh? Now, I'm going to show you exactly how you do that. So you need to have your editor screen up as before, and we're going to go to Tools, and we're going to start Diagnostics. Now, unlike before, our next operation isn't going to happen in the query editor. You're going to go back to Power BI, and we're going to go over to this Customers, and we're going to refresh it here. So it refreshes very quickly. Again, it's a simple query, and we're going to stop Diagnostics. Query Diagnostics can pick up the traces from the main Power BI experience, not just the query editor experience. So now we have a new detailed table that we're going to call Customers Filter Refresh Detailed. And just like before, I'm going to enable load, and I'm going to load it my model. Now, one more time, we're going to look at what this looks like in our new table. Replace the category, replace the exclusive duration, and put on a new start time. Okay, and you can see immediately we have a much simpler even than the preview refresh. So again, we're going to grab these rows, and we have what is actually executed when we press refresh. So this is a much simpler thing. You can tell that basically it's looking at the document and it's running those queries. So I think something interesting, and we can look at the query as a whole if we want. Let's go back to step. There we go. So something that's a little bit interesting is if we look at the actual emitted data source query, which you can see it retrieves that one final row, we can see in here, like I said, that we're filtering on sales representative and we're filtering on that customer ID. And while it's not super intuitive yet, what I think that you should think about is that if you apply an operation that doesn't show up here, if it doesn't show up in whatever your query language is, if it doesn't show up in the endpoint you're hitting for OData or whatever, you can assume that it's not being folded. One of the most common questions that we get is, how do I know it's being folded, especially if it's not showing up in the Show Native Query button in the query editor. So, if we go to the query editor, we have a View Native Query. And that's, this is exactly what you saw in there. But there's a lot of connectors that doesn't work for whatever reason. Maybe you built it yourself. Maybe it's something that doesn't have that idea of an easily displayable query language. Maybe it's going through generic ODBC. And what this will let you do is it will let you see what Power Query sends, what Power BI tells Power Query to send, and be able to reconstruct an idea of exactly what's being pushed down to the backend data source. There's a number of things that we're hoping to improve in the near future. Like I said, there are additional columns that we're going to be added to the detailed traces. We're going to be improving aggregations. Right now, aggregations tries to help you understand why different operations are being performed at a very high user actionable level, but sometimes it can be a little bit overeager about how it assigns things. And there's also things that we're learning about our own product from this capability. And it's going into public preview, and we really are looking forward to your feedback.
Thanks, Colin, for the insights into the Query Diagnostics feature. This month, we're also introducing a couple of other significant enhancements to our data profiling capabilities within the Power Query Editor. One of these is multiple grouping options for the column profile pane value distribution visual, specific by column type. In addition to the existing by value criteria, now we have length, like by text length, number, by sign, like positive, negative, or parity, even odd, date time, by all sorts of different categorizations, year, month, day, week of year, day of week, AM, PM time, hour within a day, and a lot more others for other data types, including logical, true, false, etc. Moreover, not only can you leverage those type-specific grouping criteria within the column profiles distribution pane, we've also enabled filtering from within the callouts for each of the values in the distribution chart when the grouping criteria is applied. So, for example, you can easily exclude all values that fall in a given month right from the data profiles pane for a date-time column. Hopefully, these make the data profiling activities that you go through both more robust and more convenient and intuitive, and we hope that you have better insights as a result. So, as far as miscellaneous updates, this month we're releasing a new file format, PBIDs or PBIDs, to streamline the get data experience for report creators in your organization. Administrators create these files for commonly used connections, and this is to help the getting started experience for new report authors. So, when an author opens a PBIDs file, Power BI Desktop will launch and prompt for authentication to connect to the data source specified in the file. Let's look at an example. Here I have a PBIDs file. I'm going to go ahead and open it. And Power BI Desktop is going to launch, and it's going to ask me for authentication. After that, the navigation dialog will pop up, and the user will need to select the tables to load into the model. They might also need to select the databases if one wasn't specified in the file. So here I have the connector, and I have been authenticated already, so now I'm going to have to select to import this. I'm going to just click load here, and then it loads it in for me. So after we do that, then the user can already start building visualizations, or he can go back to recent sources to load a new set of tables into the model. So for the user, that really streamlines the process of making a data source connection and getting into creating the report very quickly. And for a new user, that's great because the administrator already has that experience and already knows what those data sources are and how to find those connectors. So this is an example of what a PBIDs file looks like. For the administrator to make this file, they need to specify the required inputs for a single connection, and they can also specify the mode of that connection, which is either direct query or import. If it's missing or not there, then the user that opens the file is going to be prompted to choose one. So there are a lot of examples of PBIDs files. We have them all on our documentations page, so if you're interested in creating these, please go over there, check them out, and hopefully this helps really streamline that process for new report creators to get started and to get creating those reports. Finally, we've made some performance improvements for modeling operations in the analysis services engine. So this speeds up operations like adding measures or calculated columns, creating relationships, etc. The model satisfies a few conditions for our improvements to take effect. First, it contains a lot of calculations. Second, it uses any of the use relationship or cross-filter functions. And third, it uses any of the today, now, random, etc. volatile functions. So, while the actual improvement you'll see is going to depend highly on what your model looks like, we have seen a 20x performance improvement for some of our customers when we're doing things like opening the file and adding a measure. And keep in mind, these are for the types of operations for which performance is most critical, because they contain a lot of calculations. So we hope you enjoy the results of our improvements. And that's all the features we have for you this release. Please be sure to leave us your feedback. We really do appreciate it, and it helps us know what features you'd like to see in Power BI Desktop. We'll see you next month. Thanks.